Welcome to the Basis Project on the English Constitution with Albert Burgess, interviewed by Caroline Stevens. We'll be joining them momentarily.
Good afternoon, everybody. Here we are in sunny Wiltshire. We're meeting Albert Burgess. He wrote a book on the British Constitution, and his email address will be available for people to write and ask for copies. Albert, good afternoon to you. We had a little chat before we came on air. We were talking about me being the campaigns officer now for Democracy 17-4, which basically stands for the 17.4 million people who voted for Brexit in June 2016. We are on a mission to get 600 independent MPs into Parliament. MPs who live locally in the constituency, who have not the vested interests of big pharma, green energy, arms companies, not being on the sex offenders register. Albert, what do you think to this idea? Because it's quite innovative, isn't it?
Well, it's quite innovative. All MPs initially were independent. And I think it was a good thing. Party politics, my dog has just decided to take off. Party politics have put paid to that idea, but I think we should have independent members of Parliament. I think those members of Parliament should be answerable directly to the people who elect them in their constituency. And I think the people in the constituency, if they're not happy with their member of Parliament, should have a right of recall and to have a by-election and re-elect somebody else.
Well, that sounds sensible. So, we've seen so many divisions, haven't we, between people because they stand for different parties. But I was in Lewisham earlier on in the week to have a look at their by-election and assess the likelihood of being able to get somebody in that was totally independent and totally local. You've got 13 political parties standing plus one independent. Many of the people who are standing for the parties, they're not local, so they may not be that familiar with Lewisham East, and most of those people are actually going to lose their deposit. What do you think to that, Albert?
Well, I think members of Parliament should be elected from people who live in the area, work in the area, and bring families up in the area. And I think that they should all be independent. And as I say, I think the people in the area should have a right of recall if they don't do a good job.
Now, we were talking about the MPs. A lot of them have shares, vested interests in armaments or big pharma. The NHS, we know, is being privatised. What is your experience of the NHS, Albert? What do you see going on here?
I've used the NHS all my life, and in fact it's always been extremely good. And I object strongly to private medicine having work being contracted out from the NHS to private healthcare. The reason I object to that is because it's not that the quality of care is any worse or any better. It is because it is not cost productive. It's like the PFI thing with Tony Blair, but it were building hospitals. If you buy a plot of ground and you buy a hospital and you build a hospital on it and you equip it and you staff it, that is what it has cost the taxpayer. If you go to somebody else and say, well, we want you to buy a plot of ground, build a hospital on it and equip it, and we will staff it, but we will rent back the hospital and its equipment from you forever, then in fact you are paying out for that hospital long after it would have been paid for had you built it through the NHS, and the NHS had done the whole thing themselves.
Now, of course,
you are paying somebody else's shareholders a profit for building the hospital and then renting it to you. It makes no economic sense.
So the taxpayer loses big time. So we can't continue with this, can we?
The taxpayer always loses big time It would be nice to see people who need urgent medical treatment saying to the NHS, no, I'm not going to a private hospital. I've paid in for you all my life. I want you to do it.
And of course,
but in point of fact, people are not going to do that, are they? Because they don't want to go onto a waiting list for ever and a day, and they want their operation done. So they'll get it done wherever they can, and you can't actually blame them for that. But the fact of the matter is that government are getting into arrangements with private healthcare and with people who want to build hospitals and rent them to the NHS, which are not cost effective long term for the taxpayer. They're just not cost effective, and we should be getting into it.
of course, we were talking earlier about on the Medical Council, we've actually got chief executives from Big Pharma sat on there. I mean, surely that is a big conflict of interest as well. Why is the government, why are our MPs allowing all this to happen? You know, they like to put a lot of blame on the Lords. Well, you know, in David Cameron's time, he stuffed the Lords full of people who were his friends. I mean...
Well, absolutely, and so did Tony Blair, and so has everybody else. Do you know what I mean? The Parliament Act of 1911 is constitutionally illegal and constitutes an act of treason because it overawed the House of Lords into agreeing not to ever be able to chuck out a bill permanently. They can only hold it up. In 1911 it was for 2 years. In 1949 they reduced that to 1 year. And then Tony Blair threw out all the hereditary peers. But the House of Lords has an absolute common law right. It's what they call a common law cognizance to carry out its own business its own way and to decide who does and who does not sit in the House of Lords. This has nothing to do with the House of Commons at all. Yet Tony Blair and Asquith and others have put these laws through which have overawed the House of Lords, which happens to be an act of treason contrary to Section 3 of the 1848 Treason Felony Act. So if we take the 1911 Parliament Act, every Parliament since then, because the arrangement were changed as to how Parliament worked with that Act, and the House of Lords was overawed and refused permission to permanently ban a law and say, no, we're not having this at any price, because of that, every single Parliament since then has in fact been an unlawful assembly because the 1911 Parliament Act made Parliament a different set of arrangements via an act of treason.
Right, Albert, can I just stop you there? Because you will know, and I'm sure many of the listeners and viewers today will be aware that there was a judgment made at the beginning of this year to say that Parliament is sovereign, and effectively, having met some of the MPs since that judgment was made, they believe that they can do whatever they want to us. So how can we take back control, which is what Brexiteers actually promised in 2016?
Who made that judgment?
Some judges.
Well, those judges had no right to make that judgment, so it's void and it doesn't count.
Way.
Under the common law of kingship, total, complete and absolute sovereignty lies with the king. Now, in 1689, we had the revolution.
Is that the glorious one?
That was the bloodless one, yes. The 1689 revolution, where they made the Bill of Rights, Declaration of Rights and Bill of Rights. And basically, Parliament say that transfer, that because of the restrictions it placed on the king, that bill transferred sovereignty from the king to Parliament. It did no such thing. All it did was it laid down the restrictions on the king, which King Alfred had placed upon himself in 886 when he became king. So it simply restated those things which the king couldn't do, which our kings have never ever been able to legally do. And, when kings have done them and tried to do them, we've got rid of them. Most of them we've killed. James II, we slung out the country. We forced him to flee the country. And then they appointed William and Mary. But there were no new restrictions on the ability of the king. So according to the government, they say that transferred sovereignty to them. They didn't. But George III, everybody says, George III was mad. George III suffered from an illness called palsy. And that was a recurring illness. It came and it went. When he was stone cold, logical and sane, he was actually an exceptionally good king. And he had a 22-year running battle with the House of Commons as to where sovereignty lay. The debate actually started in Parliament on the in January 1784, and they had the vote on the 8th of March 1784 in Parliament. And after William Pitt, had made a speech in which he said, is it better to be governed by one despot rather than 350 despots who can't agree? And so as a result of that, they had a vote in Parliament, and King George III won the vote. So by the common law of England and by parliamentary vote, Queen Elizabeth is the supreme governor of England.
Right, so is she going to listen to us then? Is she going to take back control?
Well,
didn't you write to her the other week?
But basically, Queen Elizabeth, we have a problem with Queen Elizabeth. In fact, that she is a very nice lady, but she was educated in constitutional law from the age of 12 to 22 by a man called Henry Marten. And Henry Marten was a Fabian. And the Fabians, you and I know, want to destroy all that's good in this country. So he is not going to tell her exactly what the constitutional situation is. She would have been taught the Constitution as it was written by Professor Dicey in the 1800s. And Dicey talks about the sovereignty of Parliament. But Parliament is not sovereign. There is only one person sovereign in this country, and that is the Queen. Parliament is only sovereign when the Queen sits in it. And because up until George I, every one of our kings attended Parliament. In fact, most of the time, it wasn't a Parliament if the King didn't call it himself, and he was there all the time to get something that he wanted out of them. So it wasn't a Parliament without the King in it. Our last Queen, Queen Anne, she in fact attended every Parliament, and she attended all the cabinet meetings. So she was able to influence what was done in the country by government. George I, who was the son of Princess Sophia, who was next in line after Anne, was in fact born in Germany, and he in fact, although his mother was English, and there's a different rule for royal women than there is for normal people. In the normal case, my children take my nationality, but if I was in line to be a Queen of England, my husband takes my nationality and my children take my nationality. And Sophia was English, and she was a Stuart, and she was next in line to the throne. So basically, George I was not a German. He was English under the system that we run in this country. He was English, so he's not German. So let's get rid of that one for starters. Then he came here, but he didn't speak any English. He spoke German very well, and he spoke a bit of Latin, but no English. So he didn't bother going to Parliament, and he didn't go to cabinet meetings because he didn't understand it. So what would then happen is that Parliament would just put pieces of paper under his nose that he couldn't understand, he couldn't read it, and he would just sign it.
That's so just what's happening in Parliament now, though, isn't it? Because, listening to people talk, they've come back from Parliament and said, oh, these civil servants actually just put pieces of paper in front of the MPs to sign, and the MPs don't even know what they're signing.
Well, this is the case. But I mean, the fact of the matter is that happened with him. George II was born in this country and spoke English, and he spent his entire time complaining that his ministers were kings in his kingdom. George III then argued about this and fought back, and it was decided by parliamentary vote that George III and of course all his descendants were in fact the supreme governors of England. Now, Parliament, that was a parliamentary vote, and of course, like all parliamentary votes, it would have gone into a parliamentary roll. Now, the parliamentary rolls at that time, they didn't have a library. So what they did was they would just chuck all the parliamentary rolls into a room, and they were all lying around the floor. So if you were a member of Parliament and you wanted to know what happened 50 years ago, you would go into this room knee-deep in parliamentary rolls, and you'd have to pick them up, open them, look at them, then throw them down until you found the one you wanted. In 1816, Parliament decided they needed a library. So they employed a librarian. It took him from 1816 to 1834 to catalogue all of these parliamentary rolls and have a cardex so that you could go in and you could look up what you wanted in the cardex, and it would tell you which shelf it was and which row it was on. But in 1834, when you could go in there and find the actual parliamentary roll that said that full sovereignty lays with the king, they had a fire which broke out in the boiler house underneath the library, and it burnt down Parliament. But the first part of Parliament to go was in fact the library with all the parliamentary rolls.
That was convenient.
Well, very convenient. So basically, Parliament then said, "Oh well, we don't have to worry about that parliamentary roll." Unfortunately for Parliament, I have a book of the letters of King George III, where on the 9th of March 1784 he wrote at 9 o'clock in the morning to William Pitt, thanking him for saving the Constitution. And there was a very famous historian called Hume. Now, he's a Scotsman. I don't like him very much because he didn't like Elizabeth I very much. But apart from that, he is acknowledged as one of our best ever historians. And I have a 3-volume set, a very old 3-volume set, published in the 1800s of his. The original was written in 17 something. And in this book, there are 3 pages covering, and they are large pages. They're bigger than A4, but they are large pages, and they cover every bit of the debate in Parliament and the vote on where sovereignty lay. So Parliament can argue about it as much as they like, but the fact is we have documentary evidence from reputable people that in fact this vote took place and what the result was.
And what year was that, Albert? Sorry, what year?
The vote was taken on the 8th of March 1784. 1784.
Right.
On the 8th of March. So basically, what happened in Parliament on that day is recorded in our history books, in our normal history books. So Parliament can't now turn around and say, well, that vote never took place, because we actually have the history books that prove that it did.
But if we fast forward it to now, we were just talking before we went live, we were talking about common law. Our MPs still say that they understand common law. We dispute this because they think that Parliament is sovereign. That doesn't equate to common law at all. How lawyers' books have had common law removed since, 1952?
No, I mean, common law is common law is common law. It lasts forever, and it can't be removed because it's been there since before time of memory. So in point of fact, it's become the custom and practice of England. So it can't be removed by Parliament. And in point of fact, Chief Justice Sir Edward Coke, Chief Justice of the King's Bench in 1628, he ruled that Parliament may sometimes pass a law which is repugnant, which is against common right and reason, and which is impossible to perform, in which case the common law will intercede and strike it down. So we got one of the top judges, the most well-known judges in the world, in point of fact, of our old judges, he is saying that the common law can overrule Parliament. So Parliament are required, when they make a bill, when they put a bill through Parliament, they are required to make sure that that bill corresponds to the spirit of their common and constitutional law. Now, they're not doing that, and they're ignoring our constitutional and our common law whilst they ignore what they're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
So basically, Parliament are, in fact, our politicians have been on this power grab, as I explained, since 1420. And they now think that they have total, complete and absolute control, and they can do whatever they like. And they evidence that by saying that they have Henry VIII powers, which were illegal when Henry VIII had them. Henry VIII, in fact, was friends of the Bishop of Rochester. The Bishop of Rochester had a cook called Richard Rose. The bishop upset the cook. The cook poisoned the meal. 17 people died.
Albert, can I just interrupt you? Can you alter your camera, please? It's your camera, your screen.
Yeah. Is that better?
Great.
Thank you. Yeah, that's brilliant. We've got some questions actually on because we're live on Facebook. We've got a question for you, Albert. Somebody has raised, I think was it John Taylor raised, that the question of the hard border between North and Southern Ireland. Have you got any comments about that constitutionally?
Northern Ireland is part of the United Kingdom. If we, in fact, leave the European Union, which we are duty bound to do, because A, it's illegal, it always has been, our membership, and...
Would you like to just expand on that, Albert? I believe that we were taken in unlawfully or illegally. Could you explain why the 1972 Act, European Communities Act, is unlawful?
Explain exactly what it is, because ever since Alfred the Great refused an archbishop from the Pope, it has been the custom and practice of this country to refuse foreign interference in the internal government of this country. This is repeated time after time, and a good many of our kings, when they've been given stuff by the Pope, have been told you've got to accept this, have actually told the Pope basically to go paint his face yellow and hide it in the corner somewhere, because they are rejecting any foreign interference in this country. The only law that is permitted in this country is in fact the King's law. Anything else imagines the death of the king as a fully sovereign king, and therefore is treason, contrary to the 1351 Treason Act. So when you join the European Union, on the day we joined, we took in 2,000 new laws, which was more than we had made for ourselves in the previous 700 years. So immediately our statute book immediately went over the top double. But every one of those laws was being imposed upon us and actually constituted an act of treason directly against the sovereignty of Queen Elizabeth. So every one of them is illegal and doesn't count.
Are you saying that our MPs are all treacherous against our Queen then?
I'm saying that they are treacherous against the Queen and the country, and that we need to take the whole lot out.
Take the whole lot out. What do you actually mean by that, Albert?
I mean, I think they should be arrested and put on trial, charged with treason, and then executed. That is what I mean.
Yeah.
Because that is what they have done.
Yeah.
And where people say, oh, well, you can't hang people for treason anymore. Tony Blair stopped that. By stopping the ultimate penalty for treason, Tony Blair, in fact, made treason a win-win situation. Because if you, in fact, commit treason and it works, you get the country. If you commit treason and you get caught, you get sent to prison for life, which is probably only 10 years nowadays. And so what's going to happen is while you're in prison, you're going to get somebody to ghostwrite your book for you if you can't write it yourself. It's going to be made into a major television series. It's going to be made into a Hollywood blockbuster film. And all that money is going to be paid to you in an offshore account, because it can't be paid to you in an English account, because you can't make a profit out of crime under our law.
Just what I was going to say.
So it's all going to be paid into an offshore account for you. So when you come out of prison, you're going to be a very wealthy man. That makes treason a win-win situation. That increases the risk of treason. By increasing the risk of treason, you are actually committing treason yourself. So Tony Blair, when he repealed the death penalty for treason, was actually committing treason in his own right at that time.
So going back to the Northern Ireland, so we were taken in, and what's the word we should be using? Unlawful or illegal?
They're the same. I mean, basically, there's a lot of nonsense talked about unlawful and illegal being two entirely different meanings. They are two sides of the same crime. If something is illegal, it's unlawful to do it. If something is legal, it is lawful to do it. And we take our meanings of our words from the Oxford English Dictionary, and that's exactly what the Oxford English Dictionary tells you. So there is no difference between the meanings of the words illegal and unlawful. They are just two sides of the same coin.
And there's no excuse, there can be no excuse made for all our 650 MPs, because even if they believed that we were taken in lawfully, we actually produced the documents that it was in all the mainstream media, wasn't it? Reported last November that we were, all the lies, you know, the secret papers.
You're talking about 30-10-48.
That's right.
Well, 13 years ago, I walked into a police station in Oxford, an all-day police station in Oxford, and I had some folders. I've got them here now if you want to see them. And they contain printouts of all of the discs from the shoehorned into the EU CD, which is largely it's 1/3 of the documents which people would call 30-10-48 now. But it lays out how Parliament were lied to, how the country was lied to by Heath and his government, and how they conspired to surrender this country to a foreign power, knowing full well that what they were doing. And I took that into a police station then. Shortly after that, I got the full 600 documents, and they were then submitted to the police as well. And that was done 13 years ago. At first, the police started laughing, and then they stopped laughing. And then all the police forces in the country started talking to one another, not about dealing with treason, but how to avoid dealing with treason. It's a bit of a poison chalice treason if you're a policeman, isn't it? And you're going to take out government. So they all wanted to avoid it. So they then spent a lot of time talking about how do we avoid dealing with this, until eventually we now have 17 county police forces, including the police service of Northern Ireland, who have now recorded allegations of crime against named government ministers. And they forwarded those to the Metropolitan Police to be investigated on the basis that the Metropolitan Police is better placed geographically and financially to undertake an investigation into the government. And successive commissioners of police have refused to actually investigate it. Bernard Hogan Howe, when I submitted the treason, the Maastricht treason allegation, which I had drawn up for me by a barrister, so it legally is very good, and when I submitted that, he wrote back to say they weren't going to deal with it because it was vexatious. So I said to him, well, I replied to him and said, well, look, if you believe it's vexatious, you believe I'm wasting police time. So why don't you come along and arrest me for wasting police time according to, I think it's Section 5 of the 1967 Criminal Law Act. Or better still, because I am naming people that I want you to arrest and put on trial for treason, why don't you come along and arrest me for perjury? Now, wasting police time is dealt with by a magistrate, and it's a Mickey Mouse charge, really. Perjury is quite serious. You can go to prison for 7 years for perjury. So why don't you come along and arrest me for perjury? and we will see whether a jury of my peers agree with you or not. And then I said to them, they won't, of course. And the minute they find me not guilty, I will turn around to the bench and I will ask them to issue a bench warrant for your arrest and your staff officer's arrest, collectively for misprision of treason and for compounding treason. Now,
That makes sense.
What?
That's quite logical, isn't it, that?
Yeah. So basically, misprision of treason is where you know that treason has occurred or is about to occur and you do nothing about it, and is treated exactly the same way as treason. And compounding treason is where a group of people know that treason has been committed or is about to be committed and agree among themselves not to deal with it. But they're all treated as treason. The only difference being that for misprision of compounding treason, you get life imprisonment, they don't execute you, whereas for treason, they execute you. So, but yes, English law is very, very, very simple to understand. It's very easy to work through, and it is extremely logical.
So going back to the question then about Northern Ireland, it was actually from Seamus.
When we leave the European Union,
When?
there'll be no question about it, we have a hard border because South Ireland want to stay in the European Union. So they will be a foreign country as far as we're concerned, and nothing to do with us. And they take their orders from the European Union. We will not be doing that. So we need a hard border. There's no point in. You see, the problem with Ireland and Northern Ireland is this.
Can you move your camera again, Albert, please?
The problem with Northern Ireland is this: that we allow people from the south to wander into the north of Ireland without any checks at all. We've done that forever, right? So what happens is then we can get people coming from Europe into Ireland, and then all these European people can then walk up into Northern Ireland and then get the boat across to mainland Britain. And unless we have a hard border there to prevent that, we are not going to do anything about our immigration problem, which is a major problem. And we're not going to be able to do anything about it because people are just going to come in through the back door through the south of Ireland. So if we split from European Union, which we must, although Theresa May is doing her best to put it off and off and off and off and off, then in point of fact, we must have a hard border with the south of Ireland.
Albert, can I just interrupt you? Can you move your camera, please?
Well, I can, but it keeps pulling back down with the weight of the cable.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Albert, can you move your camera?
He's done it.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. Albert, do you think, the fact that our government is wanting, actually, firstly, introduce the transition period and then wants it extended to 2023, which goes after the next general election. Surely it's becoming obvious now to people that the government has no intention of doing anything about Brexit. The rumours are from Whitehall that they've not been preparing for Brexit at all. And this is just simply kicking the can further and further down the road because, as you know, one parliament is not bound by its predecessor.
Yeah. Unless, of course, you're accepting the fact that the European treaties are lawful in this country, which they're not. But if you accept that they are, every government is bound by the European treaties, which override English law according to European law. But, so basically, the argument that we have to stick with is that English law forbids our membership of anything. It forbids the imposition of any laws or anything else into this country. Now, we had two very good laws put in by Edward III in 1351. Well, three. One was the Treason Act. The other one was the Act of Provisors, and the third one was the Act of Praemunire. Now, the Act of Provisors made it an offence to dispose of any English asset to a foreign owner. So if you were running a farm, which is an English asset, you could sell the pigs and the sheep and the cattle off of your farm, or the wheat off of your farm, anywhere in the world you wanted to. But what you couldn't do is sell your farm to a foreigner. And the reason for that is because a lot of people, when they were dying, would want to buy their place into heaven. And so what they were doing, they would leave a couple of farms off their estate to the local abbey. And the local abbey would then promptly transfer ownership of those farms to the Pope. So the Pope was getting quite a bit of real estate in England. And Edward III decided to stop that. So he made it illegal, the Act of Provisors. The Act of Provisors was considered by Edward III to be a treasonable, the act of committing a provisor was considered by Edward III to be a treasonable offence. So the penalty was quite severe.
Albert, can I just mention something, actually? That's a really important point, because there are a lot of buildings, especially in London, that are actually owned by, shall we say, the Far East, the Middle East?
Yes.
It's having a really devastating impact on people's affordability of property, and other issues are being brought up because of it. What could we do realistically now? Those properties have been sold by whoever. Can we take them back into our control?
Well, of course we can. We could compulsorily purchase a lot of them, or we could simply say to these people, "You had no right to buy them in the first place, so get lost."
These are bought up. They should show under the land registry, which is now being digitised, isn't it?
Well, I've no idea, but the fact of the matter is that the Act of Provisors was repealed in the Criminal Law Revision Act of 1948 by a Labour government. The Act of Praemunire, which forbade the imposition of any foreign law into this country, which forbade the extracting out of this country, or drawing out, as he put it, of this country, of any of the king's subjects to be tried in a foreign court, which is the European arrest warrant, isn't it?
Yep.
And any of his bishops to excommunicate any of his subjects on the orders of the Pope. So basically, these were all considered to be acts of treason. Now, that was repealed by the Labour government in the 1967 Criminal Law Act. Now, you can see where I'm going from here. The Labour government is supposed to be full up with working class people, isn't it? There are working class people who have been elected to Parliament. And yet the working class people in Parliament were removing the protections that protected us all. You know?
That seems crazy, doesn't it? We've been living a lie all these years. And I noticed Seamus put up a statement saying, is UK not a democratic state? No, it's not democratic, is it, at all?
Yeah, but the fact of the matter is that after the 1911 Parliament Act, House of Lords, with a hereditary period, could not reject those repeals of those laws. They couldn't do it. Now, I actually asked the Law Commission why they repealed the Act of Praemunire, and they came back and they said, well, it was repealed because it hadn't been used for a long time. We hadn't made any arrests, we hadn't had any charges, we hadn't had any court cases for a long time. And I said to them, well, I thought you lot were lawyers. And they said, well, we are. And I said, well, I thought you would know that the object of law is not to punish crime, but to prevent it. You make a law so that people don't commit the crime in the first place. But a law that has no punishment is toothless. So you make the law to prevent the crime, but then you actually put a punishment into that law to make sure that people don't break it. So that's the way it works. I said, now, the fact that you haven't arrested and charged anybody with committing a praemunire for 300 years or more doesn't mean that the law is no good. It means it's working very well because nobody is committing a praemunire. And there is no principle of obsolescence to English law. English law does not recognise a principle of obsolescence of a law. As long as a law is working, it doesn't matter who put that law in and how old it is still fully viable law and is still required to be applied. You know, I mean, if you take relatively modern law, I saw a police superintendent on television one night, and the superintendent was in Birmingham, and he was complaining about the fact that Birmingham is besieged with boy racers, and that they need new laws to deal with them. And I thought, well, what a fool. If at the moment you have the Road Traffic Act, and the Road Traffic Act allows you to take your boy racer and you can give him a fixed penalty ticket, which is endorsable for driving recklessly or carelessly or whatever, dangerously. You give him a fixed penalty ticket. The boy racer waves that at you and all his mates like a medal. You know, look at me, I've got a medal. But if you apply Section 28 of the 1847 Town Police Clauses Act, that allows a constable or any person to arrest any person for driving or riding furiously to the danger or annoyance of the public. So straight away you arrest him. You don't give him a fixed penalty ticket, you arrest him, it goes to the police station. But the law doesn't leave it there. It says that he will be kept in a police cell until such time as he can be taken to court. Now, as most boy racers come out on bank holiday weekends, you know, on the Friday night, you're going to arrest a boy racer on a Friday night. You're going to chuck him in the cells where he stays until Tuesday when the courts are open. But you leave his nice flash car with its £1,000 hi-fi unit and its nice alloy wheels and its beautiful spoiler parked by the roadside because he's now in a police cell. When he goes to court, he's going to get hammered by the court for being a pillock. And when he gets back to his car, he's going to find that it's been given parking tickets, and it's probably going to have no wheels on it, and it's probably going to have a busted window, and his nice £1,000 worth of hi-fi unit has been nicked. Isn't that a much more effective way?
You've got a vindictive nature, Albert, I'm sure.
No, I just understand human nature. Isn't that a much better way of dealing with boy racers?
True. You know? But then again, you know, you said about him being the boy racer being left in the police cells for the weekend. But of course, we know that people can't be kept for more than, is it 24 hours without...
No, we don't know that. We know that for most modern offences, that is the case. But the Town Police Clauses Act is still fully the law, and government can't repeal it. Because it says in the Act, a constable or any person can make an arrest, that becomes what they know as a preserved power. And government can't get rid of it. Because of that any person bit, the government can't get rid of it. And as long as it's on the statute books, it applies as the law. And the law, we have to apply the law the way it's written. And the 1847 Town Police Clauses Act says quite clearly that you take them, put them in a cell, and you keep them there until such time as you can take them before a magistrate.
Well, it's certainly a deterrent, isn't it? It's a much bigger deterrent, isn't it, what you're suggesting?
And what I'm saying is that we have deterrents in this country which the police are either not aware of or, in fact, they are not dealing with. They're not using them. I mean, for example, if my wife tells me she wants, which she does regularly, I have to say, that she wants me to clean the upstairs windows, and I'm standing out on the window ledge cleaning the upstairs window, that's offence under the 1847 Town Police Clauses Act, Section 28. So I can be arrested for standing on the window upstairs, any window above basement level, I can be arrested for standing on. Now, when the policeman arrests me for standing on the window, and he says, "What are you doing up there doing that?" And I said, "I was cleaning the windows." And why the hell were you standing on the windowsill? Because my wife told me they wanted. So they then go off and they arrest my wife for telling me. And get me to do that. Because you know as well as I do, Caroline, that us boys, we tend to do exactly what you want.
Well, we've got this on recorded, so I'll show your wife this later on. So, yeah. Albert, so we're in the situation now. We are almost 2 years after the most famous vote in our history. The most people actually voted. 17.4 million people voted for Brexit.
Yeah.
Now, we've been uncovering government corruption, which has been going on, and the power grabs for so long now. Brexit is just it's almost become a side issue. Whilst this is happening, and whilst the government are delayed tactics and not actually doing a great deal apart from talking, what else is happening is we've got rollouts of 5G with big health risks, big question marks over it. Again, there's no debates in Parliament. You know, when I went into politics 5 years ago, I had no idea for several months that Parliament just don't debate. Even, I know they just basically delegate it all to the EU now. And what are we going to do about the 5G? I mean, surely our national parliament is supposed to start debating again, isn't it?
I saw a government minister on the telly the other, retired, an ex-government minister on the telly, and he was talking about civil servants. And he said, when I, as a minister, asked a civil servant a question, they evaded it and they avoided it and they put it off, and it was like getting blood out of a stone to get an answer out of them, you know. And I thought, well, you're not much of a government minister, because if I was a government minister and I asked a civil servant, why have we just spent all of this money, you know, doing this, that or the other? Why have we spent all of this money when we could actually have done it much cheaper if we'd gone down this route? And the civil servant ummed and ahed and refused to answer my questions, then I would sack him for gross negligence, for gross incompetence or whatever. I would sack him. And then the next time I came to a civil servant and said, now can you answer my question? He's going to start thinking very long and hard about his pension, isn't he? So he's going to tell me what I want to know. And the fact of the matter is that people in this country get away with things because nobody gives them a penalty. And it's like our police force. Our police force, they refuse to deal. For many years, they refused to deal with the Islamic rapes of our children. They refused to deal, although they knew full well about them all, they refused to deal with the VIP rapes of our children, because, you know, they thought that, you know, this is bad news and we're not going to do it. When we had the Cash for Honours inquiry, you know, anybody with more than half a brain would be aware that the only reason half the idiots in the House of Lords are there is because they bought their way in by giving government money, either directly into party funds or into somebody's pocket. That's how they got into government, into the House of Lords. And yet not a single arrest was made for that. When we had the expenses thing, the police had evidence that 310 members of Parliament had committed fraud in their expenses claim.
Half of Parliament committed fraud.
Yes, they did not in fact make a single arrest. Then there was a huge public outcry, right? Then they went out and they made 5 specimen arrests, all of whom were sent to prison. Now, that leaves 305 out of the 310, which are miscarriages of justice, isn't it? It's neglect of it's neglect of duty on the part of the police to actually go out and arrest those people. But should we be surprised? John Yates, the Assistant Commissioner who investigated both these cases, he was having an affair with his 30-year-old Australian woman at Scotland Yard. His wife found out because the girlfriend was pregnant. His wife found out and gave him the elbow. He's still got to pay for the big house his wife is living in because he's an Assistant Commissioner, so he has to live in a house to suit the rank. So he's still got to pay the mortgage on that. He's still got to support his wife, and he's got to run a new home with the girlfriend and the new baby. So when his 2 sons came along and said, "Dad, can you pay for our airfares to go on holiday?" he agreed to do that. But instead of putting his hand in his pocket, because his £180,000 a year salary wouldn't keep up with airfares and keeping 2 homes going, he spent the air miles that he got as an Assistant Commissioner travelling around the world on police business. The police rule is simple, and that is that these air miles are to be used They are the property of the Metropolitan Police, and they are to be used to offset the cost of future travel. John Yates was found out about this by one of the newspapers, like the News of the World or something like that, and it was all over the papers as John Yates's boob. I submitted a formal allegation crime against John Yates for fraudulent misappropriation of air miles, the property of the Metropolitan Police, and via them the public, or fraudulent misappropriation of the air miles, which equals taxpayers' money. And John Yates, I'm told by my sources, was running around Scotland Yard saying, because he'd been, the commissioner had simply ordered him to repay the money. So he's running around Scotland Yard complaining that some bugger has gone and reported him. And he was then forced to resign. Not straight away, but eventually he did resign over it. And then we find out that the commissioner, who hadn't arrested him and charged him with fraudulent misappropriation, which is theft, we then had to resign because he had taken a £12,000 freebie from a health spa, which him and his wife had spent in the health spa. They'd clocked up a bill for £12,000, and the owner said, "Oh, don't worry about that, you can have that." But that we know about. How many freebies and other things has he taken that we don't know about? So he was forced to resign. So when you join the police force, the first thing they tell you in the training school is there is no such thing as a free meal. Somebody offers to buy you dinner and you go and have that dinner. As sure as God made little apples, sometime down the line they're going to come to you and they're going to say, "Look, I've got a bit of a problem. I got arrested for this, or I've got this ticket and I'm being summoned for this. Can you get me out of here?" They will want something in exchange for the dinner. So they tell you there's no such thing as a free meal, so you don't take the free meals. The Commissioner of Metropolitan Police took a £12,000 free meal.
But how many going back to the MPs then, I mean, the thing is there are so many snouts in the trough, aren't there? I mean, you've got MPs who spend their summer holidays in rich businessmen's, apartments in Italy, on Russian boats.
Of course, it should all be illegal. It is all illegal. It's corruption. We have a parliament today which is so corrupt it's worse than the third world government, banana republic. And we need to clear it out. We need to start again.
We need a big reset button, don't we? I mean, I see that President Trump is trying to do his best over in America. I mean, the common law started in this country and we exported it to the rest of the world. So the rest of the world must surely be looking at all the shenanigans that are going on in the UK and thinking, we're supposed to provide this beacon. What sort of beacon are we showing to the world?
Well, that's right. The fact of the matter is, my honest opinion is it needs about 10,000 people to go to Scotland, to the House of Parliament, go into both houses, walk in, pick up the members of Parliament, all of them, pick up the peers, all of them, and simply walk them into the gallery and throw them off the gallery into the Thames, with instructions, if in fact they manage to survive the high water spring tide we just thrown them into, then in fact they will never hold any public office again. And we need to start the whole process again, and we need to hand country back to the Queen, and we need to say to the Queen, this is what we want you to do. We want you to call an election, but in the meantime, we want you with selected advisors to govern the country for, say, a year while we sort out people to run for Parliament. Then we want to call an election, and we want all members of all political parties banned from entering anybody into an election. We want every member of Parliament to be independent.
Well, let's see if we can. Well, if we can get enough people signed up on the Democracy 17-4 website, if we can get 10,000 people on there, we'd have those 10,000 people ready and waiting to go down to Parliament. Do you think Parliament is the place to be, not Windsor Castle?
No. You see, the Queen. A friend of mine, he died a couple of years ago, a man called John Gourier. He was a major in a yeomanry regiment, and he spent a lot of time in working with the royals, most of his career, in fact. And he said that the Queen is actually hopping mad about what is going on in the country, but feels that she doesn't have the authority to do anything about it. And that if the public went into revolution, then the Queen would come down and side with the public. He said if you mention the European Union in front of Princess Anne, the air is bluer than ever was in any barrack room he's ever been in his life. So, you know, I mean, the royal family are on side. I'm a bit doubtful about Prince Charles because he got some weird and wonderful ideas. but nevertheless, the royal family, by and large, are on side. I would like to see, rather than Charles on the throne, I'd prefer to see Anne on the throne. My personal feeling. And it's no certainty. It is not a certain fact that Charles will inherit the crown because it's part inherited, it's part elected. And up until James II, every time we had a coronation, a knight in full armour, and I'd like to see this come back, a knight in full armour would ride into Westminster Cathedral, Westminster Abbey, and he would throw a mailed gauntlet on the floor, and he would say, are there any foul and base traitors here who dispute this person's right to become king? If so, I will await you outside. And he'd walk outside, and then he'd wait there. And then if you didn't want that person to be the king, you picked up the mailed gauntlet and you walked outside, and you had a fight outside with the king's champion. And if you won, if you killed the champion, then in point of fact, that person didn't get crowned. They'd probably crown you because you won. You defeated the king's champion, and now you had the right to the crown.
Well, Albert, I feel that we've got plenty of food for thought from this show, that we could run another show to follow up on this. Would you be up for coming on again?
Yes, of course.
Brilliant. It's been a pleasure interviewing you, Albert. We've just put your email address on the screen, albertburgess@hotmail.com. If anybody would like to contact you, ask you a question, or if anybody would indeed like to buy one of your books. How much are they, Albert?
Well, the books were £5 with postage.
Thank you. Anyway, once again, on behalf of the Basis Project and Democracy 17-4, thank you and have a good afternoon.
I will try.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Well, thank you very much indeed. We'll fade you out on that and.